part.
Okay.
And visual, I may need both of them together may work, visual as well as text. So
Mhm.
I am looking more at the sentimental or the NLP, all those things.
Okay. So, just to answer like this, like to speak a little bit about this, the algorithms in the end are going to be similar. Okay. If you use like deep learning, you'll use same models like CNNs, RNNs. So RNNs are generally used for NLP. Okay. And uh, CNNs are generally used for text, but they can be interchangeably used as well. And there are like some tasks in which you need to perform both. So there is something called as VQA, that is visual question and answering, wherein you need to understand the image and answer the queries related to the image. So, for example, if you have given image of say some person wearing a hat, and the context is you'll ask the machine, um, you'll ask the machine if what color the human is wearing a hat, and it should answer if it is like red, something like that. It should answer it red. So it is a combination of both. But yeah, the the core part is same in both the cases, just that your data pre-processing and everything changes a little bit. Okay, so then the next thing is we have modified the model according to our interest. The next thing that we want to do is we want to train the model. So what do you mean by train the model is
Vinay, you are able to see my screen. Sorry, I'm just interjecting.
I'm
So
able to see.
just let me know when I have to shift. Okay.
Yeah, sure. So we are what exactly do we mean by training a model is suppose uh, now we have data. We have already told like somewhere that this particular image contains a malaria parasite, and the other one does not contain uh, like it is a normal one. Okay, so what will happen is we want to tell the algorithm, you know what, that this is the data, train according to your is what is a malaria parasite and what is a normal blood sample. So on basis of that, the model or algorithm will be training itself. So as you teach any human or any human baby, you need to tell that you know what, this is a bottle, this is water, um, and only then they are able to understand. So this is basically what it means to train the model. And once you train it, you want to evaluate your model as well. Like for example, if you train a student, you want to test it first so that you know if the person has actually understood anything or not. So that is why evaluation is necessary. And after that, there is something called as parameter tuning. So suppose you got some result, say you have trained the model and you got say 80% accuracy in your training. Okay, and you evaluated and you got 80% accuracy. Now you want to increase the accuracy somehow. So what you'll do is you'll change a couple of things in your model, say learning rate of the model, or the pre-processing methods, or anything. So you'll do that. You'll do the parameter tuning, and after that you again train the model. So are you getting it? What I'm trying to say? So you're going. So this process number 6 to 8 is a loop. And this step 9, deploying the model, is a whole different thing. So this generally deployment of the model is not something that generally people want to like in academics research they do. They generally are done by uh, you know some companies like uh, companies like Code Vector Labs, because this is tough and it takes a lot of time also. So that is why generally in any of the research paper or anything like that, they will generally, what they'll do is they'll evaluate the results and write a paper out of that. Okay. So I think I am back with my laptop. Priyanjit, you can stop sharing. I will share my screen. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Finally. Okay, so we have spoken about, this raw data collection, this one, this is also done. So I wanted to tell you that this steps like parameter tuning, evaluating and training the model again and again. So this is in loop unless and until you get sufficiently good results. Once you get good result, then you can like publish your work. But this step, deployment, so deployment is basically you deploy your model to somewhere, some software that can be used by other people. So this step requires a lot of efforts, and you don't need to do that, at least from research point of view. But in case if you want to do this, you can do that. Like deployment of the model is one of the important things. Unless and until you do it, your model is not going to be used by anyone else. Okay, fine. So then so what we are going to do now is, um, I will show you some code go through. Okay, I will show you some code, and we'll see how this steps are there, like everything, each and everything. If um, there is like how to do this raw data collection and parameter tuning and evaluation and everything, like see the results and whatnot, and based on that we'll try to map everything there. Okay, so just give me a minute. I'm just opening the code base. Yeah, can you see the code, like this collab document?
Yep.
Just let. Okay, fine. So as we have discussed about different steps, so first there's raw data collection. In this particular case, for data collection and all that, we didn't go to any hospital or something like that. So there is always already a publicly available data set that is there. So this is the link for that. Okay. So it is published by NIH. Uh, so you can see that there are like some open access data sets, and this is the data set related to malaria cell images. So what we are going to do here is we can simply run this code and we'll be able to download this particular file. Okay. And once we are able to do that, what will happen is we'll unzip it and we'll be able to see the data. So what will happen here is, just to give you an idea. So raw data collection is done because we already obtained the data. So this particular data set is already annotated. So the data set itself contains like the information about which cells or blood samples are malaria positive, or like contains the parasite, malaria parasite, and which one is normal one. So first two steps are taken care of because we have already obtained the data set. Now the next step is data pre-processing. So in the code only I can show you. Um, so this code is related to data pre-processing. So what we are doing is we are resizing the images into 32 cross 32 pixels. So this is very small image, but it should work. Okay, and we are using this normalize function to normalize the image. As I had told you already what normalization is. So this is our pre-processing code. Okay, so what we are doing is we are taking the data and resizing it and normalizing it. So these are like pretty common, tasks to do. So you can see that here cell images. You can see that this is already classified. So in parasitized, you'll see all the images which are which contain parasites. Okay, and in this uninfected folder, you'll see all the images that are there, which are not uh, not infected. So
Vinay, can you
that's
just show a couple of images for
yeah.
parasites? Yeah.
Yeah, so here you can see that this is one image. So here you can see that this is called as ring. Okay, so this is a parasite. Okay, this purple one. This is parasite, and this one also contains some parasite. Okay, these images contain parasite, and if you want to see like uninfected data, I can show you that as well. Take some time. Anyway, I'll show it. But the thing to note here is this is our pre-processing code. So in this particular cell, you can see that there are no parasites, right? There is no like purple thing inside this blood sample. Okay, so this is what you want to train your algorithm to do. Okay, so the most common two things I had told you already. The first thing is to resize the image, and other thing is to normalize the image. Okay, so we have done that, and for this particular code, you'll see that we have loaded the data set of cell images and all that, and we have done something called as um, split. So what happens is, suppose you have a data set. Okay, so this is 100% data set. Okay, what you want to do is you want to spare some part and you want to only train on say 80% of the data, and if you want to validate on 20% of data. So what you're basically doing is you're taking 80% of the data from your whole data set and training your model on that, and this validate data set you'll only use just to check if your model is performing well or not. Okay, so because basically this is unseen data, so this is unseen and this is seen by the algorithm. Okay, so this is just the code for that we are getting 80% train data and rest validation data. Okay, and here you can see uh, that we have loaded this training and validation data set, and these are two classes. Basically, this is a classification problem. So one class is parasitized and other one is uninfected. Okay. So now the next thing is our algorithm, as you can see in this slide also. Um, we have to create a model. Okay, so this is part of algorithm. What we have done is we have used this MobileNet V2 model. Okay, and we have modified a little bit. So there is something called as test time augmentation. You don't necessarily need to do that, just for the sake of understanding that you can do something like this. Okay, so you have to tell how many classes um, your model is about. So in our case, our model is about two classes only. So instead of five, you should write two. Okay, and these are like all just metrics. Um, so see in this every training step, how we train the model is we take the data. So X is the image and Y. So I will draw it. So X is about X is your image data. Okay, and Y is what exactly it is. It is parasitized or uninfected. Okay. So what we do here is loss function. So what is happening in this particular algorithm is while you're training, you're taking this X and Y is the absolute truth. This is absolute truth. Okay, that you have. Now, when you send this, you'll only send this data, right, to your algorithm. Like ideally, you should only send this to your algorithm and want to know what this Y is. You want to know what is Y, whether it is parasitized or uninfected. You want to know that. But during training step, what we do is we send both of this X and Y so that model trains, like, it has already some answers so that when it is a time to test, you only provide this X and it will provide you Y. Okay, so what we are doing in this particular case is we're taking X and Y from our current understanding, from the model's current understanding, we are predicting Y. Okay, so here you can see that this spreads. This spreads variable is about predicting Y. Okay, I mean, it can be absolute truth. Like this Y, the original Y is absolute truth, but this is what your model understands, like has given the answer as. Now, suppose if you like take a difference between this absolute truth and predicting Y. If you take a difference, you'll get some error rate. So in case if this predicted answer is very similar to absolute truth, what will happen is this loss value will be very low. Okay, and in particular case, if this is very different from the absolute truth, then this is very high. So this whole point of this algorithm is to make sure that you want to minimize this loss. This is basically the whole algorithm. You want to make sure that you want to minimize the loss, and how you can do it is there are like lot of algorithms like gradient descent and all that. So ideally, this is basically minima maxima problem statement. Like we find minima of a function. So something like that, we are going to do that in this particular case. We want to minimize this particular loss function, okay, this loss value, so that if we are able to minimize this, so automatically our predicted values will be similar to the absolute truth, right? Uh, so guys, did you get this one? Like, was it clear or should I repeat it again? If anyone has any questions related to this. Okay, no questions. Fine. Okay, so anyway, so that is all a whole algorithm. What we want to do is we just want to reduce the loss values. Okay, and we just train the model. So this is just a code to run the training model, and so since it takes a lot of time to train and all that, what I have done is I've trained it already for you and shown some graphs. Okay, so in two cases, we have done the graphs. So this test time augment with test time augmentation and without test time augmentation, you don't need to understand. This is just a method that I'm just using to compare if it is improving the performance or not. Okay, so here you can see that these are like lots of graphs and all that. So in this particular case, you'll be able to see that uh, training precision and all that, F1 score, recall, accuracy. So in this case, you'll see that training accuracy is 100%. So one means 100. Okay, 100%. And for validation accuracy, you'll see that it is 95.90. So almost 96% accuracy. Okay. So like this, you can also do if you want to like perform the same classification task on some other data set. You just need to load it properly like this. You just need to change this number of classes. Okay, and if it is like same images and all that, and if you want to change any data pre-processing methods, you can do that. But ideally, I mean, it should work as it is also, and you just need to train it. And once you train, you'll see this graphs and all that. You can evaluate it easily. Like, mm, suppose if you want to check the results and all that, if you feel that these results are sufficient for my research work, then go with that. Go with that, and yeah. So that was it about the code go through. You can also draw some confusion matrix and all that. Just check check it again, like with accuracy and all that. Yeah. So this was about the code go through. Um, okay. So we'll move further. Now I'm going to show you some slides from our initiative AI Chan that we used such slides to teach our students. Okay, so this is this is basically what we are going to do here is we're going to get a little bit information about deep learning. Okay, so this is about deep learning. Obviously, you should not directly jump to deep learning without understanding what machine learning is. But I think you've now gotten a rough idea that you know what, there is a data and there is a algo, and this algorithm's main task is to reduce the loss, and that is it. So reduce the loss, and this loss is basically calculated from absolute truth and predicted values. Okay. Okay. So anyway, so we'll just go through what deep learning is, just to give you an idea, and if you are interested into it, then you can learn it properly. It won't take you a lot of time if you have a good idea about the whole thing, like whole overview. So that is what we are going to do in this particular case. Uh, okay, so we are going to, understand about little bit about human brain, and just show you what kind of mathematics is required for deep learning. And this ANN, ANN is like a very simple, neural network. So CNN is for generally used for images. ANN can also be used. So ANN is very simple version of any deep learning neural network. So it is called as artificial neural networks. And if you understand this, rest all the networks like RNN, CNN are very easy to understand. And then we'll try to speak about a couple of things about training the models and all that. Okay. Mm. So inspiration from human brain. Mm, okay, so you can see that generally what deep learning is about. We want to understand how human brain functions, and deep learning is inspired from our human brain. Okay, it is not the same, it is just inspired. Okay, so you can see that all this 86 billion neurons and all that are in human brain, and there are like 100 trillion connections between our neurons. Okay, and what it does is basically it takes some input, it processes it, okay, and sends some output. So there are three steps: takes input, processes it, and provides output. So this is basically, you know, uh, this is a neuron. Okay, this is a neuron, and this is a basic block, basic unit. You can say basic unit of human brain. Okay, so these are like something called as dendrites. This is nucleus, axon terminal. So these are connected to other neurons. They get some input here, they process it somewhere, and they provide output to other neurons. Okay, so these are like major steps. So in deep learning also, we do the same thing. We take input, we do some processing, and we provide output on the basic unit. Okay, so mm, okay, so before going there, we just want to understand what kind of mathematics is required. It is very easy. Like the maths required for deep learning is very easy, very simple, like high school mathematics. Like the scalars, what the scalar is, vectors are matrices. So tensor is something new to many people. So it is nothing but matrices with more than two dimensions. So it can be three-dimensional or multiple dimensional. Okay, so and this kind of data type we generally use in GPUs to perform the computations faster. Okay, and yeah, so this all LP norm, you might have heard about it. L1 norm, L2 norm. So L2 norm is the Euclidean norm, and that is exactly where we calculate our numbers and all that, or even calculation of the distance. So just to give you an example, um, the formula to calculate a point. So there are like 2 points, and you want to calculate distance between them. So L2 is your common one. So the formula you might know, y, I think y2 minus y1 square plus x2 minus x1 square. Something like this is there. And then L1 is basically the Manhattan distance. You calculate the absolute distance between them. So this L2 generally we use. So in some cases you might want to use L1 also, but majorly we use L2. And then matrix transpose and all that. Matrix like transposing it and all that, matrix multiplication. So all this very simple basic mathematics you need to understand, and this is a very important equation, equation of hyperplane. So you might know the equation of line, y is equals to mx plus c. So in higher dimensions we use this equation. So suppose in two dimension, in two dimension, if you want to separate data, we what do we use? We use line. So this is one equation. If you want to like separate data in three-dimensional space, we use plane. Okay. And if you want to separate the data in higher dimensions, we use hyperplane. So this is basically the equation of that. Okay, so this is very important. So y is equals to w into x plus b. Okay, cool. Okay, so then we are here to speak about ANNs. Okay, so ANNs, like common components are this: perceptrons, layers, weights, bias, laws, forward propagation, backward propagation, and whatnot. So this perceptron is similar to what a neuron is in human brain. The perceptron is basic unit of artificial neural networks. And when you combine this perceptrons in a single layer, it is called as layer, and you'll see what all these things are. So perceptron, so this can be also termed as a neuron. Okay, like this is basic unit of neural network. Okay, so what, as we have seen in like the human neuron, what it does is it takes, first step, it takes input, it processes and provides output. So here also we are doing the same thing. Okay, so this x is called as input. Okay, so this whole thing, x1 and x2 are like different kind of data. So x1 and x2 both are inputs. This is called as weight. Okay, these are called as weights, and this is something called as bias. Now, if you remember our equation of hyperplane, what was it? It was y is equals to w x plus b. So if you compare it here, so this is our input, this is these are our weights, and this is our bias. Okay, and this is something called as activation function. So this is majorly your processing part, what exactly you want to do with your inputs and weights and biases. Okay, and this is basically output. It can be provided to some other perceptron or other neuron. Okay, so this is same. What we are doing is we are using this equation of hyperplane, and you can here see that what we are doing is x1 into w1. Okay, this is multiplied x1 into w1 plus x2 into w2 plus this bias. Okay, so this equation you'll see it everywhere. Everywhere you'll see this. Uh, so what exactly happens when we say that we say that we are training the model? So what do we mean by that is we are we are updating the values of weights and bias. So only these things are updated. Input will remain same, right? These things are updated like weights and bias. Okay, rest all everything is same, and we want to change this in a way so that a task is performed. Okay, so this is just an example of activation function, like what a pre-processing and all that you can use. Okay, you can easily create and gates or gates, all of that using the values of proper values of w1 w2 and this activation function or threshold value. Okay, so totally depends on you what you want to do. uh, but this is just a basic idea, this is basic block. So if you understand how this particular block works, then you can easily understand what is going on in the whole network. Okay, so this is ANN. Okay, so as you can see, so this one particular thing is this is a perceptron or a neuron. Mm, let us say neuron. This is basic block. What is it doing? It is taking input, it is processing it, and it is providing output. This also it is taking input, um, it is processing it, and it is providing output. Okay. So same thing happens again and again. So this one particular thing is called as layer. Okay, this is a layer. This whole thing is called as like the neural network. This one thing is called as neuron. X is all you know, input. W is weights, and this is bias. Just remember the equation of hyperplane. Y is equals to W into X plus B. Weights, input, bias, and this is your output. Okay. So we are calculating it again and again. So what is so many people have this question: what is difference between normal neural networks and deep learning? So generally, this neural networks they come under like ML, but when this hidden layers, so this layer can be one or multiple. So when these are like multiple hidden layers, okay, when there are like multiple hidden layers, so that is why we call it as deep learning, because it contains a lot of layers. And in neural networks, they call it for like two or three layers network, called generally they are termed as neural networks. But as we introduce more and more hidden layers, we try to call it as deep learning. Totally depends on you what you want to say. But yes, so that is how it is done. So I just want you to tell about how this model actually learns. Okay, so during training phase you provide X as well as Y, right? So this Y is absolute truth and this is your input. Okay, so what exactly you're doing is that this training process generally means that modification of W and B weights and bias. So this and these things, like the values of these things, is going to modify. Okay, rest all is going to same. So this is input. So input is not going to change anyway. So how does it actually learn? Is the first step is you initialize this W ij. So this is say W11, this is say W12, this is W13 and all that. So you randomly initialize W and B values. Okay, randomly you start to initialize. Then what you do is second step is you calculate this x1 into like the same formula of your perceptron and all that, x1 into w11, then for this particular output what it will calculate is x1 into w11 plus x2 into w12 plus x3 into w13 and things like that, plus b1, so and then pass it through activation function, and that it will send to this. So this will be again be x for this particular perceptron. Okay, so like this. So this whole step, like passing of input to output, like this calculation till last step, this is called as forward propagation, because we are passing inputs in forward direction. Now what happens is, so this y, okay, so these are predicted values. Okay, these are predicted values. Now you have this absolute truth and predicted values. Okay, so what you do is you create this loss function which takes this predicted value, say y hat, and absolute truth as y. Okay, and you calculate the error between them. So you can use any function such as say RMSE, cross entropy loss. Okay, all these things you can use and calculate the loss value. And if this loss value is minimized, then your predictions will be automatically correct and your accuracy will increase. Okay, so depends on you what kind of loss function you want to use. Also depends on the task that you use. Okay, once this loss is calculated, we tell this loss to this whole neural network that for the current values of this weights and biases, this is the loss function. So then what it does is, so this is called as back propagation. This is called as back propagation. We are basically back propagating the loss. Then accordingly this weights and biases are updated a little bit. Okay, little bit. So that algorithm is called as gradient descent. So anyway, they are updated and then the same process is repeated again. Like again, forward propagation, calculate the loss, try to minimize it. So for that, you back propagate, again, do that for multiple steps till you get like good results. So second step is forward propagation. Then you calculate loss function. Then you back prop, and then you repeat again and again. So okay, So this is the training process. Uh, okay, so we have initialized randomly these weights and biases. Then we perform forward propagation. We try to predict a y, try to calculate loss. We back propagate and we update the weights and we do it again and again in the loop. And this is just a formula to update the weights. So to update the weights, there is something like or minimize the loss. There is something called as there is an algorithm called as gradient descent. What it does is, suppose your loss functions curve is something like this. Okay, so what it will do is randomly initialize. Suppose you are around this point, and what this algorithm will try to do is it will try to take you to this minima. Okay, not necessarily you'll always get to global minima, but that is the point of this algorithm, that it takes you to a minima so that your loss function is reduced. Okay, then there is something called as linear functions and non-linear functions. So this is just a math. uh, just tell me this equation y is equals to mx plus c, is this a linear function or non-linear function? It is a linear function, right? Because it something like this is a line. Okay, so this is a linear pair. Now suppose that this is some of your data. Okay, so these are like ovals and they're like some kites or rhombuses. Okay, so you want to separate these data points, like in one boundary you should get all this ovals, and in the other one you should get all this rhombuses. So to to do this, a linear function is not able to do that. For that you need to use some non-linear function. Okay, you need to use some non-linear function. Mm, that only then. So for example, this is a line, so this is a linear function, say x square curve, so this is a non-linear function, something like that. So just to make sure that our data is separated properly, we try to introduce non-linearity in our model. Now we know that we are using equation of hyperplane y is equals to w into x plus b. Okay, so this is also linear. So to introduce non-linearity, what we do is we use activation functions. Okay, so they are like non-linear functions, and they introduce this non-linearity in our neural network, so that the model is properly able to differentiate between such kind of data. Okay, so these are like just activation functions. So this is one activation function that is commonly used. This is also non-linear. ReLU, rectified linear unit, max of 0 comma x. So from for the positive side, it is linear, but it is max of 0 comma x. So in the left side, it is non-linear. So that is why this can be used to introduce non-linearity. You can use other functions such as tan hyperbolic, sigmoid, and all that also. Just to introduce non-linearity. And in case if you want to learn more about neural networks and all that, you can watch some videos, um, like neural networks, gradient descent, how it actually works. Because we have less time, we won't be able to cover everything. Just that I have given you some overview, and you can look at that. And there are like obviously some problems and all that. I'll just speak a little bit about this and yeah. So I think Priyanjit has already discussed about what imbalanced data sets are. Suppose you have two classes, okay? In our case, like parasitized and uninfected. Suppose you have, say, 90% of data parasitized and 10% of data uninfected. So this is imbalanced data, right? Balanced data would be 50-50%, right? Something on those lines. It is also fine, like 45-55 is also fine, but this is very imbalanced, right? Now, when you are going to train your algorithm, if your algorithm start to say that always it says that it is a parasitized data, so it will directly get 90% accuracy, right? But the model is not actually working fine because of this cost. So you generally want to make sure that you don't do this. Also, small data sets is a general problem. So you want to make sure your data set is large. Augmentation is modifying the data set. Okay. Um, like for example, one image is there. Suppose you change the contrast or maybe rotate it a little bit so that you try to increase the amount of data set. Okay. So a lot of things are very technical. So I'm not going deep into that. Normalization, weight initialization depends. So while I was telling you about the first step, randomly initialization of neural network, so there are like multiple techniques such as Xavier initialization also that they use instead of just randomly initializing the weights. They use some techniques also. Transfer learning is basically method to use. Basically there is a large data set and some algorithm is trained on that, and that trained algorithm you train it on some small data set, uh, and the model has learned a little bit of weights and biases. As I have told you, that model only learns weights and bias only. So based on that, it also tries to learn something on the small or new data set. So that way, the accuracy is generally higher compared to training it from the scratch. Okay. Mm, yeah. So this is transfer learning. So generally, a lot of people use this. So it is used to train it faster. Accuracy also increases, and you need a lot less amount of data in your new data set. Yeah, so that was it. And in case if you want to, like, get into this, um, like this deep learning and all that. So there are like couple of tasks that we generally give to everyone. In case if you are interested, you can do that. Like try to create and get or get not get and all that. There is a data set of CIFAR10 data set, and you can train it using CNNs and all that. So there are like a lot of things. So we generally give such tasks so that the concept is clear to everyone. In case if you want to do, that is fine. In case if you don't want to do, that is also fine. Yeah. So that was it from my end. If you have any questions, suggestions, or anything, just let me know.
Sure. Thanks, Vinay. So we come to broadly the end of our session. So now I think whatever questions you guys have. So before that, let me just give a quick overview. So this part of the presentation was taken from the course that we generally do with colleges. It's called AI Champ. So Vinay is like one of the course instructors for that. I think in both these sessions, what we tried doing today was give you guys a perspective of the different applications that is happening and sort of deep dive into one practical application and go do some code walkthrough as well. so that you understand the complexity levels. So with that, we wrap up this session. So now we have some good time, 15, 20 minutes, we can spend on any question answers that you guys have.
Thank Priyanjit sir for such a scholarly and elaborative talk. It was an amazing session, sir. Thank you. And now we'll be taking the question and answers. So if you have any questions, you can raise the hand or you can put a question in the chat box and I'll take you across the speaker.
I think not everyone can type in chat box probably. Maybe they can raise hands.
Yeah, they can raise hand. In case chat box's option is not available on your screen, then probably you can just raise your hand and you can unmute yourself and ask the question. So we have one question coming from Sarika Bose on the chat box. So she's asking, her question is, what exactly is evaluation phase?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
What exactly is evaluation phase?
Okay, so evaluation phase, say for example, you have done training, okay? You have done training. So evaluation basically means you test your data set on unseen data. Unseen data is something that you have not used for training, and you want to calculate all this evaluation metrics such as accuracy, okay, accuracy, maybe F1 score, loss, all of this you want to calculate on unseen data. So this process is basically evaluation. If your model works better on this also, like unseen data also, so that means that your model is actually learning something.
So I have one question that is it that the split which we do 20% or 30
Yeah.
whatever that can be used as evaluation?
Yes, that can also be used. So some people do this in three formats, like suppose this is data set. So one part they give for validation, one part they give for test, and one part they give for train. Okay, so what is difference? Like they can also like treat like train and validation as same thing, but some people try to do this also, like they just use training data set to train the model, and with every update or every training, you just use validation directly to see the results directly. So you don't need to wait for training the whole model. You can see the results directly in validation. But in test model, once you are done with all your training process, then you use test data set. So it depends on you. Some people directly use both as same thing. Some people might want to separate these.
So
So
generally,
I also wanted to know that do we have to remove outliers for all of these, or the unseen data can be with outliers?
Okay, so unseen data, you should not necessarily, you know, because it is unseen data, so ideally you should not do anything on that. So it is fine that if you remove the like outliers in your training data, but try not to do anything on the test data, because that is the thing that you're going to get to know if your model actually works or not.
So for both the 80, 20 and even the evaluation, only for the 80 and 20 I can remove the outlier. Am I correct?
No,
Or just for the
for
training one?
yeah, so for 80 you can remove the outliers, but for 20, like all the test part, try not to remove. You can do that as well, but try not to remove. This will actually tell you if your model is actually performing well or not.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
so generally, what happens is, Vinay, can you just mute? Hello. okay, that background noise is there. I don't know. But generally, what happens is, so whatever classes you have, sometimes what happens, like in case of your outliers, let's say that you want to detect a cell, but the image is blurred, right? So there are situations when the image is blurred or the image is dark. Those cases, even if it comes, you should be able to handle in the validation set. You should be able to say can't, or you should be rejecting the images. So not necessarily that every AI model needs to give a prediction. So you need to go pre-post process.
I can't hear you. Your voice is.
Is my voice, or am I audible now?
Yes, that sound is gone.
Yeah, that is
But when you're talking, it's coming again.
okay.
I hope your any other device is not on.
I don't know. Okay. Am I audible now? Am I audible? I think it's coming from somewhere else. I don't know.
Yeah, someone is unmuted, it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's voice is gone now.
Yeah, please, can you give a overview what you said again?
Yeah, sure, sure. So generally what happens is, like, during your training data set, the 80%, you will have certain classes, right, which you want to predict. But there will be scenarios where the image itself might be wrong. So you would want to, predict a parasite or a normal cell, but it can happen that the image is completely dark. It can happen that the image is blank.
Mhm.
So validation data in the validation set, when you do, you should also have things like where you say you cannot say anything, or you cannot predict, or you reject the image completely. So
Okay.
those are basically the outliers.
Oh, outlier handling, basically, what to do about
Exactly.
that.
Exactly. So in the validation set, if you are giving a different image, or if the image is very dark, or if the quality is very bad, so those things also you should be able to handle.
Okay. So it can go to supervised or semi-supervised. It can suggest that
Sure.
whatever is the requirement basically of the project.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. I just wanted to know, can you share these PPTs by any chance?
I think the recording is there, right? I think this session is recorded.
Okay.
It's live somewhere, I believe.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Prasan. It's Vinay or who is speaking, I don't know. Thank you both.
Okay. So this is
Priyanjit.
Priyan. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you,
Can
sir. We have another question from Mr. Ananth Reddy. You can ask your question. Anyone else who would like to put up the question to the speakers?
No, madam, clear. The question is clear, madam. Answer.
Okay.
So, if nobody's there, can okay, I think there is a question.
Dr. Purnima, can I ask the question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Please.
Okay. Priyanjit, my question is with you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, Priyanjit, every software after completion or development of the software, we are going for the testing before the implementation. Is there any assessment technique we can use to test the intelligence of a machine?
So generally for AI projects, what we do is, before going live, we sort of do a lot of trials so that we can establish the sensitivity and specificity before going live for projects, especially especially if it is a client project, because accuracy levels are pretty important to be established before going live. So generally what we do is, so we have something which is known as a UAT document, which is the user acceptance test cases. So the UAT document is generally made most for like a software developer. But for such things like AI projects and all, uh, what we are doing at this moment is we generally have to do a trial, and we need to establish a specificity that this is what it is at this moment before going live. Because what happens in a lot of cases, especially for client data set, is very bad, and they generally claim that your AI model is not working. So we need to establish that the kind of data that the system has been trained on, and this is sensitive, and we need to sort of go to a sign off that sort of agreeing before making the system live. Vinay, you want to add anything on it? Vinay is
No, I think you have told it already, but the question was to measure the intelligence. I don't know if I'm taking it in another direction. So, do you actually mean by like any machine, and if you want to like calculate if that machine is intelligent or not? Is that your question?
The question was, is there any assessment technique used to test the intelligence of a machine?
Um, so not. I mean, there are certainly they use some Turing tests and all that, but they are generally used for some AIs which perform a lot of tasks. So in I think 2018 or 2019, I don't remember the exact year. So what happened was this Google Assistant software. What it did was it by itself, the software itself called for a salon and like booked an appointment, and the other human didn't even know if he was speaking to a robot uh, or a human. So there are like certain techniques, obviously, like the Turing test and all that. But yeah, generally for narrow AI, like the tasks which are the AIs which perform tasks on like specific. Some noise is coming. I don't know from there. Yeah.
Can you
So
please mute all the other participants? We are not getting the information.
Shivani Agarwal, could you please mute yourself? The noise is coming from there. Yeah. Now you can.
okay. Yeah. So I was speaking about the Turing test. So some like they kind of do, but for the machines which are used for to perform a certain task only. So in our case, what we saw was this particular part of software can only understand the difference between parasitized cells and uninfected cells. So this is the only thing. So now if you want to calculate uh, the ability of this particular machine, then we'll need to rely on the metrics such as accuracy and all that. But yeah, so that is the measure of the intelligence, if you want to say it like that. But like as a whole intelligence thing, I think there is just one test that I know of. It is called as Turing test, and it can be done in multiple ways. The whole aim of such test is there can be like humans as well as robots, and the other humans actually want to understand if they are you know uh, talking to a robot or human. So they want to differentiate if the machine is able to tell these people that it is actually human, so that means that it has passed the Turing test.
So very simplified way, we can also call it like a blindfold test, which generally happens for trials, and especially happens a lot in case of clinical AI projects or healthcare AI projects. So in my experience, what generally happens is that we have to do comparison and blindfold testing of what the AI predicts and what the human predicts, and sort of compare it. And the general acceptance level is the AI does not need to surpass the human intelligence, but it should be at least matching the human intelligence. So let's say that we take a certain image, we show it to the human, or we show it to a clinical expert or doctor. If the doctor from that image is not able to identify what it is not expected that the AI would be able to identify it as well. So such blindfold test generally happens, and then we come to the sensitivity and specificity, and we sort of publish the trial results, and generally you publish it in some research paper or some forum, and that is what generally is accepted.
Okay, is there any level of significance of acceptance and rejection?
Sorry, I couldn't get that. Matlab, you are saying what is the minimum level of acceptance?
Yeah.
Whether So especially what happens is it sort of totally determines on the base. Can I share my screen? I'll just write something and probably.
Yeah, sure.
This is a very good question. So okay, I'm not able to share my screen. I don't know why.
Generally, when we go for initial level, for example, analytics level, data science or machine learning, we determine the level of significance. But when we go for a vast level in AI level, so I want to know that is there any measurement or level of significance we can reject or accept?
Yeah, sort of. I wanted to write, but I'll just explain it verbally only. So there is something which is known as a risk matrix. Okay, there is something which is known as a risk matrix, which is very important to evaluate for AI projects. A risk matrix is basically it's like a matrix which has.
The screen is not shared. If you want to
share my screen. I'm not able to share my screen. So this matrix is being used. I think it was first introduced in Singapore, and they are using this matrix for evaluating AI projects. So it's very, very simple. It has two parts. One is risk and one is criticality. So risk and criticality basically means that if the system falters, what is the risk? तो आप बहुत सिंपल तरीके से समझ सकते हो, like you go to Netflix, right, and you hover and you are recommended certain films. Now let's say that you love thriller movies and you are recommended a funny movie. That means that the AI has made a mistake, right, in your recommendation. So the risk of the AI giving a wrong prediction in a recommender system is very low, correct? Now, if you analyze for healthcare AI projects, okay, let's say that you have a certain, X-ray scan, and you sort of want to determine whether that person has cancer or not. Now, from that image, if the AI gives a wrong prediction, so that is the criticality. You can understand the risk, right? So basically, in the risk matrix, you can just imagine in your mind risk versus criticality. It's a matrix. So which quadrant you are in? High risk, high criticality. High risk, low criticality. Low critical, high risk, like that. So you sort of then come to a conclusion that what kind of AI system do you finally want to deliver? So there are three kinds of AI systems. One is called a human in the loop system. One is called a human out of the loop AI system, and one is called a human over the loop AI system. Again, these are things not from India. These are things from Singapore. They sort of introduced. They are quite advanced in these things. So they sort of then divide AI systems into three parts. One is human in the loop system, one is human out of the loop system, and one is human over the loop system. What does this mean? This means that if you are sort of uh, dealing with a use case which is low criticality and low risk, then you don't need a human in the system. You are not also worried about the accuracy. So for example, in a Netflix recommendation system, or for an YouTube recommendation system, or for an Amazon recommendation system, there is no interference of a human. So even if it gives a wrong recommendation, it is absolutely fine. But when it comes to healthcare, you either need a human in the loop system or you need a human over the loop system. Human in the loop system means that, let's say you have an X-ray image, the AI gives a prediction, but the patient or the final user will not get that prediction unless it is verified by the human. So that is a human in the loop system. Human over the loop system. So human in the loop system would be generally for healthcare use cases, because you do not want to give a wrong prediction, right? Again, in healthcare also, it determines whether it is a very critical diagnosis or whether it is a low critical. But and the human over the loop system means that, let's say that you have your facial recognition attendance system in your office, okay, and in your office, if your attendance is marked properly, nobody needs to intervene, but if your attendance is not marked properly, your salary might be deducted. So you should have a mechanism that if the AI falters, the human can overrun that prediction. So that is a human over the loop system. This means that, let's say that you go to your facial recognition attendance system, but it is not identifying you. You go to the admin or HR and you say that, hey, I am here, the system is faltering. So the human can still interfere and correct it. So broadly speaking, first is the criticality matrix. So you sort of understand what is the criticality of the AI use case. Depending upon that, you sort of determine that what is the level of human interference that is required. If it is a highly critical system, you obviously need like a 95% plus accuracy. You cannot be accepting a 70% accuracy like that. If it is a highly critical system, you would want it to be a human in the loop system or a human over the loop system, that even if the AI gives a wrong prediction, a human is able to overturn it. But if it is a low criticality use case, you keep it as a human out of the loop system, and you might be fine with like a 70% accuracy as well.
Nice. Thank you, Priyanjit. I got your point. Thank you so much for explaining. Dr. Purnima, over to you.
Okay, ma'am. So any more questions coming up from the audience? You can either raise your hand or put the question in the chat box.
Already one question is in the chat box, Dr. Purnima. You see.
Okay, ma'am, let me check. So yes, we have one question from Habiba Aji. What is the use of object detection and where is it applicable?
So we basically used object detection in the case study only. Vinay, you want to take up that question?
Yes, so object detection is majorly used obviously in images or videos. So the whole point of object detection is you want to, look into a particular area of the image or video and want to make sure if there is an object or not, something like that. So in case of classification, like image classification or image recognition, as a whole image, you want to classify if this is one class or this is another class. But in case of object detection, you can have multiple objects in the same image. So for example, say if you want to detect a helmet, so that is one object that you can do. You can also try to detect, say, number plates. In the case study, you might have seen that it was able to detect some teeth with calicus and all that. So in such cases, object detection is used.
So basically what happens is, let's say that maybe Vinay, you can share your screen and just sort of share one message, like share a picture for object detection or object classification, if possible. Okay.
I think I'm not a presenter anymore, I guess. So that is I'm not able to share my screen.
Okay.
Let me check, sir. Let me check.
No issues. But broadly speaking, what it means is like let's say that let's say that we take Dr. Purnima's image only at this moment. So she's wearing a scarf, she's wearing specs, and she's like wearing a sort of a jacket, right? So if we have to just classify that whether a human is present or not, we will just use classification. But if we have to detect, if the problem statement is that we want to detect that whether she is wearing a glass or not, so we will try to detect each and every object, and we'll sort of do a comparison. So it will say that yes, she's wearing a scarf, she's wearing a specs, like that. So it will detect each and every object. Do we have any more questions?
Do we have any more questions?
I have put in the chat.
Yes, there's one more by Sarika Bose in the chat box. The question is she wants to know more about the general problems of the data sets.
So generally, what Vinay can also elaborate, but generally, what happens, the biggest problems, and this I would only entail to computer vision projects or image or video based projects, is the first problem is you have highly imbalanced data. So let's say that you want to detect certain things, that is your final aim, but you do not have sufficient representation of it in the data set. So that is one big problem. The second problem is that if you are doing it for a research purpose, as Vinay said, it is fine, that you can do something, you can publish something. But if you want to do something for a real life project for the industry or something like that, 9 out of 10 times whatever data set you find online may not work. So you will need real live data also. So data collection itself then becomes a huge challenge. Okay, if you want to do projects for the industry which actually works, okay, because because you would not find good amount of images data set that really that works in the industry. One such good example is like Google's diabetic retinopathy project. So Google has been working for last 7 to 8 years in India, in Chennai, to develop AI models for diabetic retinopathy. And then after trying to test it on, when it tried to test it, it failed initially. So if the aim is to do for a research paper, it's fine. But if the aim is to, actually do something on ground and get something useful, data collection has to be the kind of data that you expect in real life also. Getting real life data itself is like a huge challenge. Imbalanced data set, I would say, is primarily a major challenge as well. And a lot of time what happens is image quality also. So in my experience, I have seen that if you are working, so basically image quality comes under the header of standardization of data. So you can logically understand that when AI was getting implemented in healthcare, most of the people worked in areas like X-rays or CT scans. The reason for that was that X-rays and CT scans are standardized data. It is produced by a certain machine, and that data cannot change. So X-ray in India is X-ray in US as well, or X-ray in Europe as well. It is not a different format of data. But as soon as you go out and you try to work on use cases where you are sort of taking images from the mobile phone, or you are sort of taking images from real life, the quality of data substantially degrades, or sometimes the images will be highly bright, sometimes the images may not be of the right quality and stuff like that. So in my opinion, I think the three major practical challenges is, if you want to do it for real life, collection of data set itself is very tough. You would not find enough digitized data set. Second is the imbalance of data set, and third will be the standardization of data sets. So data quality is not good.
Thank you. I wanted to know one more thing. How much small means how much is a small data set? Means when it is, what is the number generally you understand?
Generally you can create an AI model with even 100 images.
Mhm.
Yeah, so if I call a small data set, I would typically call it 100 to 300 images.
That is small, and more than that is enough for a.
So see, the question itself is a bit ambiguous, because there is no end to a large data set. So it's the more the better. So if you want to start predicting something, let's say you have a very simple prediction and you have only one class. So even with 100 or 300 images, you can start creating an AI model which can do predictions. Let's say at 60% accuracy or 50% accuracy like that, or 70% accuracy like that. Now, if you want to improve it to, let's say, 90% accuracy or 85% accuracy, you might need 5,000 images. Okay. Now, once you reach 90% accuracy, the next 5-6% in order to improve it, you might need another 50,000 images. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So generally, I would say it depends upon the problem statement. If the problem statement is pretty simple, you can have less than 500 images, and you can have an AI model as well.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have one question from Mr. Jairam. Mr. Jairam, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Okay, madam. Good evening, sir. Good evening, madam.
Hi, Jairam.
Hello. Sir, this is Jairam. So I have a small question, sir. How do you assess the quality of the product? Is there any methods or techniques are there within the deep learning?
So generally, the accepted, that is what I think I said previously also. So you get the sensitivity and specificity of the AI models. So once you have created your system, you need to come across the terms, come across the numbers, that what is the sensitivity and specificity of this system, like the true positives, false positives, and you can draw confusion matrix to come across those values. So when let's say that you have created an AI model for a prediction model for your certain project, and I'm talking of images at this point, okay? So I'm only talking of computer vision projects. So once you have created it, now you want to take it to the industry. So when you take it to the industry, the accepted numbers would be what is the sensitivity and what is the specificity of the AI models. So you need to have those numbers. Vinay, you want to add anything more on this? If I have missed anything.
No, I guess, I mean, not just specificity or sensitivity, there are other metrics as well. Totally depends on particular use case. So sensitivity, specificity are just a couple of them. That is all I want to say.
Yeah, like majorly accepted, like
Yes.
especially for healthcare and stuff like that, majorly sensitivity and specificity.
Yes.
So do we have any more?
Okay, any more questions?
So I had one more question. See, there is a significance value, like that is the p-value is of 0.05 in statistics which we use, and confidence is there. So the thing is that for different areas it is different. Like NASA has a very low tolerance for any mistake. So the p-value goes very different. and healthcare also it goes different. So is it somewhere from there we can pick our requirement of accuracy?
I will take that question.
Sure.
So yeah, so the p-value does not necessarily mean anything actually in statistics also. Like we generally use it to get some sort of correlation and understand what is contributing factor to our AI model, right? So I mean, it totally depends. If you want to calculate accuracy, I mean, depends from company to company. So, for example, some company might want that whatever the model suggests them, it should be explainable. Okay, so this is one particular case. So, when comes explainability, deep learning is not so explainable. Okay, for that reason, then you probably should use some normal machine learning or statistics techniques so that your model is at least able to explain why it took certain decision. Then some companies might want that no, it is fine that we don't get to understand what model is thinking, but it should be correct all the time. So for that reason, then you calculate the accuracy directly. So p-value, I think, I mean, and all the other like methods, mechanisms, then like not very significant in usage. But yeah, but they are actually used to build the models rather.
Okay, I got it. Thank you. It's more of like even for research papers and all, it may work, but for real usage, the actual output matters most.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
For real usage,
Thank-
nobody will take an AI product before doing a trial.
Right.
And in that
So,
trial,
all,
if it fails,
yeah, I got it. Efficiency or p-value, all those things are not very, very, they do not want that. They want it to pass their UAT mostly.
exactly. So it's so for real life, they will use it, and they will have certain like certain test cases which you have to pass. So if so, like very simply for healthcare, let's say that we are detecting oral cancer. Let's say hypothetically, so we take the image of the oral cavity, and we do it on 200 patients data. So those 200 oral cavity images, we will very simply say what our model predicts and what the doctor predicts. If it matches 9 out of 10 times, your system is acceptable. If it matches 5 out of 10 times, then your system is not acceptable, like that.
Okay.
Plus I had put a slide on responsible AI. Okay, so especially for Tamil Nadu government, a lot of focus is there on the ethical practices of AI being followed. That you have the explainability factor, that from where you have collected the data and all those things. So even if your model, let's say, outperforms and it is giving a very good accuracy and everything, but you have used certain malpractices to collect the data and there is a privacy breach and all those things, so then your system will not be acceptable. But this usually would happen at a government level.
Sure. And one more thing was imbalanced data. Is there no way of handling it? Means it may not bring so much accuracy.
Yeah, the only way
One way to
would be
yeah.
proper representation of data, right? So if you don't have, let's say I want to create oral cancer detection AI model. Now, out of 100 images in the training data set, if I only have 10 images of certain kind of cells, then it is an imbalanced data. So, yeah, so Vinay, you were saying something.
Yeah, so either you try to increase like or to get the more and more data, or you can use some augmentation technique so that whatever data you have, you try to modify them a little bit so that your number of data increases. This augmentation won't help you a lot, but it will help you to some extent.
Some
But
extent.
the best idea is to gather data rather.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Vinay, I would like to ask one question. It's a very simple question, but very important. Your company is dealing with government projects. So, what is the future of AI in India?
Okay, so this is very tough question. To be honest, like if you had asked me this question a couple of years back, I'd say that there is no hope for AI in India at least. But now that I actually see like some governments are actually taking initiative, and as we speak more about more to other people as well, so I guess that the situation is quite improving, and yeah, so it is definitely not compared to say USA or something like that. There they have lot of AI models deployed already, but we are still in that phase that we are building stuff. There are like a lot of new companies that are coming up and creating their own versions of AI models, and in that case, I think it is going to be fine, and yeah, it is just a time that we also accept AI in large scale in India.
So I'll give a answer to this as well. So basically, the day we will be able to have digitized data sets, we will be able to have proper data sets, and we will be able to have good collaborations between academia, corporate, and industry. I think that day, we'll be able to see more and more projects. The reason for that, very simple, is uh, with all due respect to everyone. So we have been working a lot with college students. So we ourselves just passed out, recently and stuff like that. So even in the government setup, I'm seeing that the highest amount of initiatives or projects that is being done is especially being done by a third year IIT student, maybe, okay, or a third year BTech student, because they are very much open to change and like that. So I believe that there is a huge amount of academia potential which we are not utilizing at this moment. That is number one. Number two is basically at a policy level. So Tamil Nadu government, I'm associated with Tamil Nadu government. So Tamil Nadu government is the first government in India to come out with an AI policy. So if you guys just Google Tamil Nadu AI policy, you will get a policy. So a policy is basically a law which you are sort of saying that in the government we want to implement. So before you see a policy level thing being introduced by any government, understand it's all in the air, right? So everything is in the air. So any government speaking anything for anything would be in the air. Once the government introduces a policy level change that yes, we want to create data hubs, we want to do this, and it is on paper, then you understand that the mind and the mouth are both at the same place. At this moment, a lot of state governments generally would be speaking a lot because the hype and everything would be there, but generally they don't have a policy, so it goes to the rough. And I think the third part would be how you sort of like how you sort of ease the trial and the testing process, because I think it is still not clear, because like for example in India we do not have a clear cut privacy policy, right? So there are data laws, but everything is scattered. So if somebody goes to indiadata.gov.in, which is the government portal for getting data sets,
Yes.
9 out of 10 times it will not be helpful. So whatever data set you need, you will not find it over there. Okay, so there is a imbalance actually. So the right communication is not happening, and there are a huge amount of practical challenges also, because let's say that I'm giving a practical scenario. Okay, let's say that we want to introduce AI for detection of pests and diseases for farmers. This is actually a project I was involved in with the Tamil Nadu government. You guys can Google how Tamil Nadu government is using AI for detection of pests by farmers. So very simple process. Farmer would take the image of a crop and it would give them a quick diagnosis that what kind of disease it is. This is happening, really happening in Tamil Nadu at this moment. Now, the challenge is, if I come back to the previous question, that whether do we have data set to do this or not, we do not have data set, right? Like, is there any data set that somebody has taken a mobile phone to collect images of crops? You will not find. You may not find that kind of data set. So now the onus is on the farmer to provide the data set so that this system is created, right? Now the question is, why would the farmer provide the data set? Is he getting any additional monetization benefit or something like that? So the structure is, it is easy to say that, you know, we would do certain innovative projects, but it is an ecosystem. So unless the ecosystem sort of, and that is where I think academics and students can go out of the way to do a lot of things which a government or a corporate cannot do. A government or corporate is good to implement the final outcome, but generally the initiation or start has to be from the other side, and you also need that policy. So I'm hoping that by 2025 we would see AI policy in at least 5 to 10 states. So the moment I believe that Telangana would be the next one, and maybe Karnataka as well. I'm not sure about Delhi, but as soon as you see the government putting things on paper that yes, we have AI policy, we have blockchain policy, that means that they will allocate budgets, they will allocate innovation budgets for AI and stuff like that, then you will see some real life things happening as it is happening in Tamil Nadu at this moment.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I gave a very elaborate answer, but
I got you, my point. Thank you so much.
Okay, so thank you, Vinay sir, and thank you, Priyanjit sir, for such an elongated and informative and great session. Thank you on behalf of the Department of Computer Science and Engineering and the ILM fraternity. And dear participants, it is now time to conclude from my side for the day one of the FDP. We hope to see you tomorrow. Have a good day. But we do have Dr. Anuradha, the coordinator of the FDP, to give some concluding remarks. So over to you, Dr. Anuradha.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Priyanjit. Thank you, Mr. Vinay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for your valuable time. Now I request participant that whenever you are trying to communicate with me, please give your registered mail ID to avoid any confusions or any communication gap. Another thing I would like to reassess is only registered participants will get the certificate. Registered means registered onto the Atal portal. Okay. Only registered on the Atal portal are eligible to get the certificate. If you are not registered onto the Atal portal and still you are attending the FDP, you are not entitled for certificate because it is not reflected at their side, so the software cannot generate the certificates. That is the one thing you have to understand. और जब भी आप मुझसे बात करेंगे, कोई मेल डालेंगे या व्हाट्सएप डालेंगे, प्लीज पुट योर रजिस्टर्ड मेल आईडी, then I will consider it as a authenticated user. Okay. If you put some other mail ID, I will search my database using that mail ID and it will give no result. Then it will lead to the confusions. So avoid that. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for your patience listening, and thank you all for your support. Thanks a lot. You can give suggestions as well. I am open to suggestions also. If it is fine, we can conclude the session now. Let's wait for 1 or 2 minutes, Vikas sir, then we will close this session. All the participants, you will get links of the videos for sure.
Thanks a lot. I think it was really good interacting with all of you. Thank you, Dr. Hemlata, for, I think we spoke a couple of months back for this.
Thank you so much. You accept my request, very nice, and you both have delivered it was very informative. Priyanjit, your session was knowledge that you have given to everyone, and Vinay, your practical oriented session. Lot of doubts, my doubts also get clear. So thank you. We will look you forward in future also. We want to make a good one association between our Department of Computer Science of ILM College and with your organization or with you.
Sure. Looking forward. Thanks a lot, Dr. Purnima. Thanks a lot, Dr. Anuradha, for the coordination and the support. So on that note, all the best wishes to all the participants who have joined, and best wishes for your future and for learning AI. Reach out to me or Vinay on LinkedIn. We are on LinkedIn. So reach out to us at any point of time. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Best wishes. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.